My only son got married in secret. A lifetime of sacrifice, of putting him first, vanished in a single moment when my breath caught in my throat. His new wife then looked me dead in the eye and delivered the killing blow. Oh, we only invited family. My name is Veronica, and for 71 years, I believed I understood the meaning of the word family. I thought it was a structure built from love, sacrifice, and loyalty. A fortress. The home my late husband Robert and I built here in Providence, Rhode Island, was supposed to be the heart of that fortress. But on a Tuesday afternoon, with the September sun warming the hardwood floors Robert himself had laid, I learned that my fortress was a house of cards, and all it took to bring it down was a single, whispered sentence over the phone. The first 10 seconds of my new life began with a dial tone. I'd called my son Leo, my only child, the center of my world since Robert passed. I was bubbling with excitement, ready to ask if they'd finally set a date. A local artisan had a beautiful handcrafted wooden chest. I wanted to buy them as a wedding gift, but it wasn't Leo's voice that answered. It was his fiancée, Portia. Her voice was like honey laced with ice. "Oh, Veronica," she said, the casualness of it a sharp little knife. "We got married yesterday. It was a small ceremony, very intimate. We only invited family." Family. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It disconnected from its meaning and became a weapon. I stood in my own kitchen, the phone suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds in my hand. Outside my window, the maple tree Robert planted was beginning to turn a brilliant shade of crimson. Inside, my world had turned to grayscale. We only invited family. The implication was so brutally clear, it stole the air from my lungs. I, Veronica, who had hosted every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, who had patched up Leo's scraped knees and his broken heart, who had welcomed Portia with open arms and my husband's wedding ring. I was not family. The silence that followed her words was profound. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs. What does a person say to that? What is the proper response to being erased? In my closet, hanging in a protective garment bag, was a pale blue silk dress, $400 from a boutique on Thayer Street. It was the color of a perfect spring sky, the color of hope. I had imagined the wedding photos, me standing beside Leo, the soft fabric a testament to the joy of the day. Now, that dress was just a shroud for a dream that had died without me even knowing it was sick. I thought back to Portia, so polished, so perfect. When Leo brought her home, I was relieved. He had found someone beautiful, someone ambitious. I ignored the little things. The way her eyes would scan a room, assessing value. The way her compliments always felt like they were attached to a request. I told myself I was being an overprotective mother. I wanted to see the best in her because my son loved her. I wanted to believe in the family we were building. I had given her Robert's mother's engagement ring, a delicate sapphire surrounded by diamonds. I remember her saying, "It's so beautifully traditional." Now I understood. To her, it was just an object, a placeholder, just like me. I wasn't a mother-in-law. I was a resource, a stepping stone. If you have ever felt like an outsider in a place you were supposed to belong, if you know that chilling feeling of being on the outside looking in, just type the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. Let's see how far this story of quiet strength resonates. I don't remember ending the call. I think I just let the phone slip from my grasp, its clatter on the floor a punctuation mark on the end of my life as I knew it. The initial shock, that tidal wave of cold, was starting to recede, leaving behind something harder, something colder. It was the first stone of a new foundation being laid in my soul. The foundation of a woman who was done being a placeholder. The words echoed, not as an insult anymore, but as a declaration of war. We only invited family. Very well, I thought, the ice spreading through my veins. Let's talk about family. Let's talk about what it costs. That single sentence, "We only invited family," didn't just break my heart, it rewired my brain. In the profound silence of my empty house, the grief I should have felt was immediately cauterized by a cold, clarifying anger. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. My currency, for years, had been sacrifice, and I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to see the receipts. I walked from the kitchen, leaving the fallen phone on the floor, and went into the small study Robert had built off the living room. It was my sanctuary, the place where I managed the quiet machinery of my life, paying bills, filing taxes, and as I was about to discover, funding a life that had no room for me. I didn't storm into the room. I moved with a strange, deliberate calm. I pulled out the heavy metal box where I kept our most important files. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air, a scent I'd always associated with security, with Robert's meticulous planning for my future. Now it felt like the scent of my own foolishness. I bypassed the deed to the house, the car titles, and my own retirement portfolio. I went straight for the folder labeled Leo. Inside, clipped together, was the document that started it all, the student loan agreement, $80,000. I remembered the day I co-signed it like it was yesterday. The pride in Leo's eyes at the bank, his talk of making his father proud, of building a future. I had seen my signature not as a liability, but as an investment in his dreams. For the past 3 years, ever since he'd graduated and was getting on his feet, I had been making the monthly payments, $800. Every single month, transferred from my savings account, the account built on Robert's life insurance, into his. I did the math, my hands steady, as I wrote the numbers on a legal pad. 36 months. $28,800. Just on the loan. It wasn't a gift. It was an erasure. $800 a month to be kept at a comfortable distance. Enough to keep them from needing me, but not enough to make them love me. But it was so much more than the loan. A dam of memories burst, and every single one had a price tag. The $5,000 down payment on his Subaru, because Portia said his old Honda was embarrassing. The $3,500 for the security deposit, and first month's rent on their ridiculously overpriced apartment on the east side because she needed good light for her influencing. Then came the endless stream of smaller cuts. The $600 vet bill for a hypoallergenic kitten Portia simply had to rescue. The $1,000 for car repairs that coincided perfectly with their weekend ski trip to Stowe, Vermont, pictures of which she'd plastered all over social media, tagging everyone but me. Every request was a masterpiece of manipulation, starting with Leo's hesitant, "Mom, I hate to ask," and ending with Portia's saccharine, "We'd be lost without you." Every family has a silent contract, a set of unwritten rules about who gives and who takes. For my entire life as a mother, I was the giver, the fixer, the one who absorbed the blows and filled the gaps. I thought that was my job, my purpose. Robert had been the provider, and after he was gone, I took on both roles. I was the savior. And Leo, my beautiful, charming boy, was the star, the golden child for whom the sacrifices were made. I never questioned it, until now. Let me know in the comments. Were you the one always called to fix things, or the one everyone rallied around? Type savior if you were the fixer, or star if you were the golden child. I am genuinely curious to see the balance in our community here. As I stared at the list of figures on my notepad, I realized my love had been treated like a bottomless bank account. My approval was a commodity they purchased with hollow compliments. My presence was tolerated as long as my wallet was open. I wasn't a mother. I was their first and most reliable investor. The anger was now morphing into something else, something sharper. A question. I thought about the last large withdrawal, a transaction from just 6 weeks ago. It was a transfer I'd made with a smile on my face, feeling generous, feeling like the loving matriarch of a growing family. $5,000. A sick, cold feeling coiled in my stomach as I remembered what Portia had called it. A surprise. A secret. The honeymoon fund. The honeymoon fund. The memory of it surfaced like a forgotten shipwreck, murky and ominous. It had been 6 weeks ago, on a bright summer afternoon. Portia had insisted on treating me to coffee at a new, trendy cafe downtown where the pastries cost more than a sensible lunch. She was at her most charming, leaning in across the small marble table, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I have a secret, Veronica," she'd said, her eyes sparkling. "It's a surprise for Leo. I want to book an absolutely incredible trip to Italy for our honeymoon, the Amalfi Coast, something he'll remember forever. I'm setting up a little online fund, just telling our closest friends and family." Closest family. She had used the phrase then, too. It was a key, designed to unlock my generosity, and I had handed it to her without a second thought. I'd felt a swell of warmth, a sense of being included in their intimate plans. That afternoon I went home and transferred $5,000, picturing their faces as they looked out over the Mediterranean Sea, and I felt nothing but joy. Now that memory was curdled, toxic. The joy I'd felt was the bliss of the ignorant, the happy smile of the fool. The cold knot of suspicion in my stomach tightened. This wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a certainty waiting for proof. With the methodical precision of a detective, I walked back to my study and opened my laptop. The keys clicked sharply in the silent room as I navigated to Portia's social media page, a digital world of curated perfection I usually avoided. I scrolled past smiling selfies and aesthetically pleasing photos of lattes until I found it. A post from 2 months ago. There was a link, accompanied by a professionally shot photo of her and Leo, looking ethereal in a field of wildflowers. The caption read, "Help us build our dream honeymoon. Every little bit brings us closer to paradise. Number honeymoon, number future goals, number travel." My hand trembled as I clicked the link. It took me to a website called Wanderlust Wishes. Their photo was at the top, along with a progress bar showing they had raised $6,200. I scanned the list of donors. There was my name, right at the top, a glaring testament to my gullibility. Veronica R., $5,000. Below it, a scattering of other names, friends of Portia's, with contributions of $50 or $100. And then I saw the tab that would unravel everything. Updates. There was one entry, posted 5 weeks ago. I clicked it open, and the world tilted on its axis. The post was written in Portia's signature bubbly style, littered with hearts and exclamation points. It read, "Oh my God, you guys are the absolute best. We've been so overwhelmed by your generosity that we had a crazy idea. Why wait for a honeymoon when we could have a dream wedding now? We realized what's most important is starting our lives together. Your incredible support has allowed us to book the most magical little garden venue and a phenomenal photographer to capture the big day. Can't wait to be Mrs. R. Thank you, thank you, thank you." The air left my body in a silent gasp. I read it again, and then a third time, the words burning themselves into my memory. The money. My money. It wasn't for a future trip to Italy. It was for the wedding. The secret wedding. The wedding held yesterday, where I was deemed not family enough to attend. The calculation of it was breathtakingly cruel. She had used the promise of a future I would be part of to finance a present I was violently excluded from. She had made me pay for the knife she then plunged into my back. I frantically scrolled through her feed again, searching for photos from yesterday. There they were, a few carefully selected shots. Portia in a chic, simple white dress that still screamed expensive. Leo in a well-tailored suit, a strained smile on his face. And there, standing beside them, clinking champagne glasses, were Portia's parents, beaming with pride. The venue was unmistakable, the lush greenery of the botanical gardens, a private estate you could rent for a small fortune. My $5,000, on display for a world I wasn't invited into. The white-hot rage I felt was so pure, so absolute, it was almost peaceful. It burned away every last shred of doubt, every lingering wisp of motherly affection. This wasn't neglect. This was a heist, a long, slow, emotional, and financial robbery executed with a smile. I closed the laptop with a definitive snap. The quiet of the house no longer felt lonely. It felt like the calm before a storm. My storm, my war. Just then, my phone, still lying on the kitchen floor, began to ring. I walked over and picked it up. The screen glowed with a name that was now foreign to me, the name of a stranger, Portia. And in that moment of chilling clarity, I knew exactly why she was calling. The heist wasn't over. They were coming back for more. I stood over the ringing phone, my hand hovering, my heart a steady cold drum against my ribs. The woman I was yesterday would have snatched it up, desperate for a connection, ready to forgive before an apology was even offered. That woman was gone. In her place was someone else, a stranger in my own skin, forged in the fire of a single phone call. I took a slow, deliberate breath, not to calm my nerves, but to gather my strength. Then I answered, "Veronica, hi, I was just thinking about you. Portia's voice was a symphony of artificial brightness, the kind of cheerful tone that sets your teeth on edge. It was the voice she used when she was about to ask for something, a weaponized pleasantry. My response was a single word, delivered with the flat, cold finality of a closing door. Portia. The silence that followed was brief, but I could feel her recalibrating, sensing the unexpected chill. A lesser manipulator would have faltered, but Portia was a professional. She pressed on, filling the void with meaningless chatter about the unseasonably warm weather, a new recipe she'd tried, a transparent attempt to build a bridge back to normalcy over a chasm of her own making. I let her talk, offering nothing in return but silence. Finally, she arrived at her destination. "Listen," she said, her voice shifting into a performance of reluctant urgency. "The reason I'm calling is a little awkward. It seems there was a mix-up at the bank. You know how they can be. Leo's student loan payment for the month didn't go through, and the grace period ends tomorrow. They're threatening to report it to the credit bureaus." She paused for effect, letting the gravity of that threat sink in. "You know how important Leo's credit score is for our future. I was just wondering, did you maybe forget to make the transfer?" There it was, the accusation, wrapped in a silken bow of fake concern. Did you forget? The implication was clear. I was the old, forgetful woman who had failed in her duty. The fault was mine, not theirs. I let her words hang in the air, the lie echoing in the space between us. For years, a sentence like that would have sent me scrambling, apologizing, rushing to the bank to fix a problem I hadn't created. But today was different. "Forget?" I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "No, Portia, I haven't forgotten a thing. In fact, my memory has never been clearer." I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process this new tone, this unexpected resistance. I continued, my words measured and precise. "I've been spending my afternoon reviewing my finances. It's been illuminating. And based on my review, I've decided to make some significant changes to my budget." I took a breath and delivered the blow I had been sharpening for the last hour. "From now on, I'll only be using my money to support family." The silence on the other end of the line was no longer just a pause. It was a vacuum. I had used her own word, her own weapon, and turned it back on her. I had taken the key to my vault and melted it down. For the first time in our relationship, Portia was speechless. She finally stammered, her voice stripped of its confident charm. What is that supposed to mean? Veronica, we are your family." "Are you?" I replied, the question hanging between us, cold and sharp as an icicle. "That's not the impression I got yesterday. There comes a time when the cycle of giving without receiving has to be broken. A moment when you must finally draw a line in the sand, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. You have to choose your own peace over their manufactured chaos. If you have ever had to make that hard choice, to finally say no to protect your own heart, I want you to do one small thing. Just type the word freedom in the comments below. It's a declaration, to yourself and to everyone here, that you are worth fighting for." Before she could form another lie, another excuse, another attack, I took back the last piece of power I had in the conversation, the end. "I have to go now," I said, not waiting for a response. "Goodbye, Portia." And with a tap of my finger, I ended the call. The click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't the end of a conversation. It was the sound of the first shot being fired in a war I never wanted, but one I was now fully prepared to win. After the call ended, a profound silence descended upon the house. The adrenaline from the confrontation, that brief, sharp high of defiance, evaporated, leaving a void in its place. And into that void rushed an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet, a deep, soul-crushing grief. I had just hung up on my only son, my Leo. I had severed the connection, and the phantom pain of that amputation was immediate and excruciating. I stumbled into the living room and sank into the worn leather armchair, Robert's old chair, and I finally cried. But these were not the tears of a victim. They were the tears of a widow mourning a second loss. I wasn't crying for the son who had betrayed me today. I was crying for the son I thought I had, the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap, the teenager who I taught to drive in this very neighborhood, the young man I had proudly watched walk across his college graduation stage. That son was gone. Perhaps he had never truly existed outside of my own hopeful heart. I was grieving the death of an illusion, the beautiful, 20-year-long mirage of a loving family that had just dissolved into the harsh desert of reality. My sobs were ragged, torn from a place of love that now had nowhere to go. As I sat there, enveloped in sorrow, a memory of Robert surfaced, as clear as if he were standing in the room. It wasn't a soft, comforting memory. It was from years ago, when a contractor tried to overcharge us for a shoddy repair job on the roof. I had been ready to pay, just to avoid a confrontation. But Robert, my gentle, kind husband, had become a wall of steel. He had laid out the contract, the receipts, and the photos of the poor workmanship, and he told the man, with a voice as calm and hard as granite, "You will fix this, and you will honor the price we agreed upon. My wife and I are fair people, but we are not fools." Later that night, he had held my hand and said something I'd never forgotten. "Veronica, you have to meet people where they are. If they come to you with honesty, you give them generosity. If they come to you with deceit, you show them iron." His voice echoed in my mind, a permission slip from the past. You show them iron. The crying stopped. It was as if a switch had been flipped. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes were red and swollen, but behind the grief, something new was looking back at me. It was a hardness I didn't recognize. It was resolve. It was iron. The transformation was complete. The grieving mother had left the room. The warrior had taken her place. My thinking shifted, the focus pulling from the painful past to the strategic present. I finally understood. For years, I had been trying to speak a language, the language of unconditional love, of sacrifice, of support that Leo and Portia simply did not understand. Their native tongue was different. It was the language of leverage, of transactions, of power. They saw my love not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. To survive, to protect the life and the legacy Robert had left me, I had to stop speaking my language and become fluent in theirs. This was no longer about getting an apology. This was about justice. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about stopping them from hurting me any further. My mind, once clouded with emotion, was now a grid of tactical objectives. A battle plan began to form. First, secure the fortress. They still had a key to my house. The thought sent a chill down my spine. They could walk in here at any moment. That was the first vulnerability to eliminate. Second, cut off the supply lines. The student loan was just one tie. What about the credit card I'd co-signed for so Leo could build his credit score? The emergency gas card linked to my account. I had to sever every financial artery. Third, seek counsel. I was a mother, a gardener, a widow. I was not a general. I needed an expert, someone who knew this terrain, who understood the rules of this ugly war. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in showing cheats the meaning of iron. The woman who had been paralyzed by a phone call just hours earlier was now a woman with a mission. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer in charge. Now, it was fuel. I looked around Robert's chair, at the sturdy walls of the home he built. He had built me a fortress, and I had left the gates wide open. No more. My duty was clear now. It was time to defend the walls. My hand didn't shake as I picked up my laptop, opened it, and typed the first word of my counteroffensive into the search bar: locksmith. The week after I hung up on Portia was unnervingly quiet. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a coastal town before a hurricane makes landfall. I didn't waste that time. The woman Robert married was a planner, and the woman he left behind had rediscovered her strength. I spent Monday morning on the phone with the credit card company, my voice firm and clear as I navigated their automated systems to have my name removed as a cosigner on Leo's account. On Tuesday, I canceled the gas card linked to my name. On Wednesday, a locksmith, a kind man named George, who remembered my husband, came and replaced every lock on the house, handing me a set of shiny, new keys that felt like solid pieces of my reclaimed sovereignty. Each action was a brick being laid in my new fortress wall. I knew they wouldn't take my no for an answer. I just didn't realize how quickly, or how brutally, they would escalate their attack. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was in the backyard, tending to my late-season roses, when Leo's Subaru pulled into my driveway. My heart gave a painful lurch, a reflexive pang of a mother's hope, but it died instantly. They weren't alone. A third man, older, with a slick, practiced smile, and a suit that looked both expensive and cheap at the same time, emerged from the passenger side. Before I could even stand up, I heard a sound that sent a wave of ice through my veins, the sound of a key turning in my front door lock. His old key. He was already inside. I rushed in through the back, my garden shears still clutched in my hand. They were standing in my foyer as if they owned it. Leo was staring at the floor, the picture of a guilty child. Portia stood with her arms crossed, a mask of cloying concern plastered on her face. And the stranger was looking around my living room, his eyes scanning the furniture, the paintings, the very structure of my life, with the cold appraisal of an auctioneer. "What are you doing in my house?" My voice was low, but it cut through the air like a blade. Portia was the one to answer, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Veronica, thank God. We were so worried. After our last call, you sounded so confused. Not yourself at all. We've been beside ourselves with worry." She gestured to the man beside her. "We brought someone who can help. This is Mr. Albright. He's a senior living advisor." The man stepped forward, extending a hand I had no intention of shaking. "A pleasure, Mrs. Richter," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Portia and Leo have told me so much about you. It's my job to help families navigate the difficult but rewarding transition into a more manageable lifestyle." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Confused, unstable, senior living advisor. This wasn't about the student loan anymore. This was an ambush. This was a coup, Mr. Albright launched into his rehearsed pitch, his words a stream of condescending euphemisms. He spoke of vibrant social communities and freedom from the burdens of home maintenance and ensuring your safety and well-being. Every word was a poisoned dart, designed to paint me as a frail, incompetent old woman who couldn't be trusted to live in her own home. Leo, finally looking up, chimed in, his words sounding clumsy and memorized. "Mom, the house is it's too much for you. The market in Providence is at its peak right now. This place," he said, waving a hand dismissively at the home his father built, "is worth at least $750,000. That money, it could set you up in a beautiful apartment at a place like the Willows for the rest of your life. We could handle the sale for you, manage the finances, so you don't have to worry about a thing." There it was, the endgame, laid bare on my welcome mat. Manage the finances. They wanted to liquidate my life. They wanted to sell my home, my memories, my husband's legacy, and put me in a gilded cage while they controlled the profits. They didn't just want an allowance, they wanted the entire kingdom. I looked at the three of them, a trinity of greed standing in my foyer, the smarmy salesman, my hollowed-out son, and his venomous wife. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I turned and walked to the telephone on the entryway table. Portia's fake smile faltered. "Who are you calling, Veronica? We're here to help you." I picked up the receiver and looked Mr. Albright directly in the eye, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "The police," I said. "I'm calling to report 3 people who have entered my home under false pretenses and are attempting to commit financial fraud against a senior citizen." The effect was instantaneous. Panic flared in Mr. Albright's eyes. Leo went pale, and Portia's mask of concern finally shattered, revealing the pure, unadulterated fury beneath. I pointed to the door. "Get out, all of you." Then I looked at my son. "And Leo," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than any shout. "Leave your key on the table." They scrambled out the door, and the key clattered onto the wood, a final pathetic surrender. The battle was over. But I knew, with chilling certainty, the war had just entered a terrifying new phase. After they were gone, the house was no longer silent. It was ringing with the echoes of their threats. The space they had occupied in my foyer felt contaminated, a toxic stain on the heart of my home. The key Leo had thrown on the table was a small victory, But the audacity of their ambush, the calculated cruelty of bringing a nursing home salesman into my living room, left me shaking not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. They hadn't just crossed a line, they had torched the entire map. My initial plan to simply change the locks and cut them off felt laughably inadequate. This wasn't a dispute, this was a siege, and a fortress with weak walls is just a prettier prison. The next morning, I was a woman on a mission. George the locksmith arrived at 9 a.m., sharp. As he worked, his hands steady and sure as he replaced the old brass locks with heavy, formidable deadbolts, I asked him about security systems. "You know, George," I said, "my husband always said a good lock keeps an honest man out. I'm starting to worry about the dishonest ones." He recommended a local company, and by noon, I was on the phone scheduling the installation of a full-ring security system doorbell camera, spotlight cameras covering the front and back yards, the works. I wanted a digital moat, a silent, unblinking witness to any future incursions. If they were going to come at me, I wanted a record of their every move. But locks and cameras were just hardware. I needed a human weapon. I needed my own general for this war they had declared. Back in my study, I bypassed the local yellow pages. I needed a specialist. I typed into my browser, Elder Law Attorney, Providence, Rhode Island, Financial Abuse Protection. The results were a list of names and smiling faces, but one stood out. The law firm of Finch & Associates. The head of the firm, Alistair Finch, had a biography that made me sit up straight. A former state prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime and fraud, now in private practice dedicated to what his website called defending the assets and autonomy of seniors. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a hunter of predators like them. I called his office and booked the first available appointment. Walking into his downtown office 2 days later, I felt a tremor of the old Veronica's nervousness, but I pushed it down. Mr. Finch was not a man who dealt in sentiment. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He didn't offer platitudes or sympathies. He offered a legal pad and a pen and said, "Mrs. Richter, start from the beginning, spare no details." And so I did. I told him everything: the secret wedding, the student loan, the honeymoon fund fraud, the home invasion with the advisor. I pushed my own meticulously calculated list of their expenses across his polished mahogany desk. He listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "Mrs. Richter," he said finally, his voice devoid of pity, but full of professional gravity, "what you are describing has a name. It's called coercive control and attempted elder financial abuse. It's more common than you think, and it is my entire job to dismantle it." Hearing him give their monstrous behavior a legal, clinical name was strangely empowering. It moved it from the realm of a messy, heartbreaking family drama into a clear case of right and wrong, of legal and illegal. I wasn't just a hurt mother, I was the victim of a crime. He laid out the plan with the precision of a surgeon. First, a total communication blackout. You will block their numbers, their emails, their social media. All future contact will be directed through my office. Second, documentation is our ammunition. We will gather every bank statement, every email, every receipt. Third, I am drafting a formal cease and desist letter to be delivered by courier tomorrow morning, legally warning them to stay off your property and cease all forms of contact. Any violation of that will be grounds for a restraining order. He looked at me, his gaze firm. They have shown you who they are. Our job now is to believe them and act accordingly. Have you ever reached a point where you knew you couldn't fight a battle alone? That moment when you finally find the one person who listens, who understands, and who says, "I'm on your side." If you've ever felt that incredible relief of finding an ally, I just want you to type the word Ollie in the comments. Let's acknowledge the power of not having to fight alone. I walked out of Alistair Finch's office an hour later feeling lighter than I had in years. The burden of the fight was no longer solely on my shoulders. I had a general. I had a strategy. When I got home, the security technician was just finishing up. He showed me how to use the app on my phone, how to view the live feeds from the cameras. As he was leaving, a notification buzzed in my hand. It was from the new system. Motion detected at your front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tapped the screen, and my breath caught in my throat as the live image appeared. A woman was standing on my porch, her hand raised as if to knock. My thumb hovered over the talk button on the security app, ready to demand who was there and what they wanted. My home was no longer a welcoming place, it was a stronghold, and I was its wary guardian. But as I squinted at the screen, I realized this wasn't an enemy. The woman on my porch wasn't Portia. She was older, with a gentle, worried face framed by soft gray hair. It was Patricia, my next-door neighbor of 15 years. In all that time, our interactions had been limited to friendly waves over the fence, polite small talk about the weather, and the occasional exchange of mail delivered to the wrong house. Now, she was standing on my doorstep, holding a small plate covered in plastic wrap. My new instinct for self-preservation battled with a lifetime of ingrained politeness. I cautiously opened the door, leaving the security chain engaged. "Patricia?" Her eyes were kind, filled with genuine concern. "Veronica, I am so sorry to bother you. Please, forgive the intrusion." She gestured vaguely towards her own house. I heard the shouting the other night. It wasn't my business, but it sounded so upsetting. Then I saw the locksmith's van yesterday, and now these cameras." She trailed off, looking embarrassed. I baked some lemon shortbread, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." Her simple, unadorned kindness was so unexpected, so pure, that it bypassed all my new defenses. Here was a near stranger, showing more compassion than my own son had in years. It was a glass of cool water in the middle of a desert. I made a decision. A fortress can keep enemies out, but it can also become a prison. I unlatched the chain and opened the door wide. "Please," I said, my voice a little rough. "Come in." Over coffee in my quiet kitchen, the entire ugly story spilled out of me. I told her everything: the secret wedding, the student loan, the fraudulent honeymoon fund, the monstrous ambush in my foyer. I spoke of my grief, my rage, and the terrifying realization that my own child saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between him and an inheritance he felt entitled to. I expected her to be shocked, to offer pity. Instead, she just nodded slowly, her expression one of deep, sad recognition. When I finished, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Veronica," she said softly, "you are not alone." And then she told me her story. It wasn't about a son, but a brother. After their parents died, her brother had immediately tried to seize control of the estate, attempting to have her declared emotionally unstable and unfit to act as executor because she was a grieving single woman. He had used the same language: confused, overwhelmed, not thinking clearly. He had tried to isolate her from the rest of the family, counting on her shame and sorrow to keep her silent. "It's a playbook," Patricia said, her voice firm. "They prey on our love and our instinct to keep family problems private. They isolate, they gaslight, and they count on us being too ashamed or too tired to fight back. The single most powerful thing you can do right now is refuse to be silent and refuse to be alone." She was right. The isolation was part of their strategy. That afternoon, Patricia didn't just offer support, she offered an alliance. "I'm part of a gardening club," she said. "A group of women. We've all been through a thing or two. I think you should meet them." The following Saturday, she took me to a gathering at another member's house. I was nervous, but as I sat in a beautiful garden, surrounded by women in their 60s and 70s, I heard echoes of my own story everywhere. One woman, a retired teacher named Maria, had fought off her grandchildren who were trying to pressure her into selling her home. Another, a sharp-witted artist named Sylvia, had successfully taken her own stepchildren to court over her late husband's will. They weren't a club of victims, they were a council of warriors. They shared legal advice, swapped stories of their own small victories, and offered unwavering, clear-eyed support. When I told them about Leo and Portia's claim that I was confused and isolated, they roared with laughter. "Isolated?" Sylvia had said, gesturing around the vibrant group. "Honey, you've just found your army." For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. I had my general in Mr. Finch, and now I had ground troops. I had a community. That feeling of strength carried me through the next few days. I felt prepared, fortified. Then, on Tuesday morning, I got a call from Mr. Finch. The usual calm, professional tone of his voice was gone, replaced by a note of serious urgency. "Veronica," he said, "we have a problem. Portia made a move. It's a nasty one. She's gone after your pharmacist." The words from my lawyer, Alistair Finch, hit me with the force of a physical blow. "She's gone after your pharmacist." The line went quiet as I struggled to process the information. My pharmacist, Mr. Gable, a man I'd known for 30 years. He wasn't just a pharmacist, he was a quiet pillar of my community, a landmark in my life. He had filled my husband Robert's heart medication prescriptions with a gentle word and a sad smile. He had given Leo his first chewable vitamins. He had watched my family grow and then shrink. The idea of him being involved in this ugly affair felt like a violation of the past itself. Mr. Finch explained the move. Portia, in an act of diabolical cleverness, had somehow convinced Mr. Gable to sign a sworn affidavit. The document, which Finch now had a copy of, was a tapestry of lies. It claimed my behavior had become erratic and concerning over the past few months. It stated that I seemed frequently confused about my own non-existent prescriptions. The most damning part was a complete fabrication, alleging I had been purchasing unusual and concerning combinations of over-the-counter sleep aids and pain relievers, painting a picture of a mentally unstable senior self medicating into oblivion. It was a character assassination, signed and notarized by a man I trusted implicitly. My first reaction was a wave of profound hurt. This felt different, somehow more personal than my son's betrayal. Leo's weakness I understood. Portia's greed I had come to expect. But Mr. Gable? This was a betrayal by the community I called home. Mr. Finch was already talking strategy, about how to discredit the affidavit in court. I interrupted him. "Alistair," I said, my voice low and steady. "I need to see him. I need to look him in the eye and ask him why." We went to the pharmacy that afternoon. The little bell above the door chimed, the same sound I'd heard 1,000 times before. "Mr.?" Gable was behind the counter, and when he saw me, a flicker of panic crossed his face before he quickly looked down, pretending to be busy. He couldn't meet my eyes. That was all the confirmation I needed. I walked straight to the counter. Mr. Finch stood quietly behind me. "David," I said, using his first name for the first time in years. 30 years. You dispensed medicine that kept my husband alive. You gave my son lollipops when he was a boy. And now you sign your name to this poison?" I slid a copy of the affidavit onto the counter. He flinched as if it were hot. The store was empty, but he spoke in a hushed, desperate whisper. He crumbled right there in front of me. He explained how Portia had come to him, her face a mask of concern. She had told him I was unwell, that the family was trying to get me help, but I was resisting. She claimed the affidavit was a formality for an intervention, a way to protect me from myself, and then came the hook. He and his wife were struggling, with chain pharmacies choking out his small business. Portia had offered him $1,000 in cash, disguised as a payment for a retail consultation. He was ashamed, he was desperate, and he made a terrible, weak choice. It takes a profound strength to do the right thing after you've already done the wrong one. It takes a special kind of courage to admit when you're wrong, to reverse course and choose the right path even when it's hard. Have you ever had to make a choice like that, to correct a mistake that was eating at you? Let me know in the comments. What time is it where you are right now? I want to see this global community of people who believe in the power of a second chance, all checking in at this very moment. As Mr. Gable confessed, his shame was palpable. "I haven't slept since I signed it, Veronica," he whispered, finally looking at me with tears in his eyes. I knew it was wrong, and then he gave us the weapon we never expected. I got suspicious after she left. It all felt dirty. She called me yesterday to make sure I'd sent the form to her lawyer. I don't know why, but I recorded the call on my phone. I think I needed to protect myself. He fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking, and pressed play. Portia's voice, cold and clear, filled the quiet pharmacy. "Just make sure it sounds convincing, David. The part about her being confused about her meds is the most important for the court to see. That $1,000 is just a thank you for helping us protect her." It was the smoking gun, a direct confession of bribery and conspiracy to commit perjury. Mr. Finch's eyes widened. We now had proof of a criminal act. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling that the tide of the war was finally turning. We had them, but as we walked out of the pharmacy, the recording secured, and a promise from Mr. Gable to sign a new truthful affidavit, Mr. Finch's expression was grim. "This is good," he said. "This is very good. But Veronica, you need to understand what this means. A desperate animal doesn't run when it's cornered. It lunges for the throat." Mr. Finch's warning about a cornered animal echoed in my mind for days. We had a powerful weapon now, the recording of Portia's bribery, and for a short while, a fragile peace settled over my life. I allowed myself to hope that perhaps the threat of mutual destruction, the exposure of her criminal act, would be enough to force a retreat. I spent time with Patricia and my new friends from the gardening club, drawing strength from their solidarity. I even started sketching again, an old passion I'd let wither while I was busy funding my son's life. For a few brief sunlit days, I felt like Veronica again, not just a soldier in a war. It was a foolish hope. The animal wasn't retreating. It was just gathering itself for a more vicious lunge. The attack came on a Monday morning. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and I was in my garden, pruning the last of the summer roses, feeling almost normal. A nondescript Ford sedan, the kind that blends into any background, pulled up to the curb. It bore the official seal of the state of Rhode Island on its door. A woman in a practical blazer and sensible shoes got out, carrying a clipboard like a shield. My stomach plummeted. This wasn't a family member. This wasn't a salesman. This was the government. My Ring doorbell chimed on my phone. Through the camera, I saw her standing on my porch, her expression professionally neutral, which was somehow more terrifying than open hostility. I opened the door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Mrs. Veronica Richter?" she asked, her voice polite and detached. I nodded. "My name is Miss Albright," she said, showing me her identification. "I'm a social worker with the Rhode Island Division of Elderly Affairs. We've received a formal report of concern, and I'm here to conduct a wellness check." The clinical, bureaucratic words were a battering ram against my newfound peace. Report of concern. Senior at risk. They had done it. They had taken their private, greedy war and laundered it through a state agency, turning their lies into an official investigation. They were using the very system designed to protect people like me as a weapon to destroy me. "May I come in?" she asked. It wasn't really a question. I led her into the living room, the same room where they had ambushed me with the nursing home salesman. She sat on the edge of the sofa, opened her file, and began to read from it in a dispassionate monotone. "Ma'am, our office received an anonymous but detailed report alleging several concerning behaviors. It states that you have recently exhibited signs of cognitive decline, including paranoia, social isolation, and financial irresponsibility." She continued, listing their twisted version of my reality. Every act of self-preservation I had taken was now an exhibit in the case against my sanity. My decision to stop paying for their lives was reframed as a sudden and irrational cessation of familial support. The new locks and cameras were cited as evidence of acute paranoia and delusional thinking. My refusal to take their calls was self-imposed isolation, a common indicator of depression and deteriorating mental faculties. They had even managed to twist the pharmacist's narrative, noting that there was a documented concern from a medical provider regarding erratic medication management. They had woven a seamless fiction, a legal document designed to prove that my fight for freedom was nothing more than a descent into madness. The old Veronica would have crumbled. She would have become defensive, emotional, trying to argue every point, an act that, in this sterile context, would have only made her look more unstable. But the new Veronica, the Veronica with a general, remembered her training. I took a deep breath and met the social worker's neutral gaze with my own calm resolve. "Miss Albright," I said, my voice even. "Those are extremely serious allegations, and because they are so serious, I will not be answering any questions or making any statements without my legal counsel present." The social worker's eyebrows raised slightly, surprised by my composure. "Ma'am, this isn't a legal proceeding. It's just a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide. It is precisely because I have nothing to hide that I want my lawyer to be here to ensure everything is documented correctly. I interrupted, my tone polite but non-negotiable. I'm sure you understand the importance of proper procedure. I took her business card, thanked her for her time, and showed her to the door. The moment it clicked shut, I leaned against it, my legs weak. They had found a way to get past my new locks, past my cameras, past my blocked numbers. They had walked right into my home, cloaked in the authority of the state. I looked at the small white business card in my hand, a symbol of this terrifying new front in the war. This was no longer just about my money or my house. They were now fighting for control of my very identity, my legal right to be considered a sane and capable human being. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was a battle I could not afford to lose. The moment I hung up with Miss Albright, I called my lawyer. Alistair Finch's reaction to the news of the Adult Protective Services visit was not one of alarm. To my surprise, it was one of grim satisfaction. "Good," he said, his voice sharp and decisive over the phone. "They've made a critical error. They've taken their baseless accusations and filed them with a state agency. They've invited an official referee onto the field. Now we are no longer just defending, we are presenting our case." He scheduled a formal meeting with Miss Albright at his office for the following Thursday. The battle would now be fought on my turf, under my terms. Those next few days were a blur of meticulous preparation. I met with Mr. Finch twice, and together we assembled what he called the Truth Dossier. It was a thick, 3-ring binder, heavy with the weight of my reality. Each page was a bulwark against their lies. We had bank statements, spreadsheets detailing every dollar I'd given them, a timeline of events, the receipt for the security system dated the day after their ambush, and the new, notarized affidavit from my pharmacist, Mr. R. Gable, detailing Portia's bribery. At the very back, in a plastic sleeve, was a small USB drive containing the recording of her incriminating phone call. This binder was my story, told in the undeniable language of facts. When Thursday arrived, I walked into Mr. Finch's conference room, not as a victim, but as a plaintiff. I was flanked by my counsel. Miss Albright was already there, looking professional and impartial. She began the meeting by politely restating the official concerns from the file: my alleged paranoia, my isolation, my financial irresponsibility. It was a narrative I now knew by heart, a work of fiction co-authored by my son and his wife. Mr. Finch let her finish, then gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Miss Albright," he said calmly. "We appreciate the gravity of the report you've received. Now, allow us to present you with the context." He opened the Truth Dossier with a soft click, and the counterattack began. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't use emotional language. He simply dismantled their case, piece by methodical piece, with cold, hard evidence. "The report alleges financial irresponsibility," he began, sliding a spreadsheet across the polished table. "Here is a record of Mrs. Richter paying $800 a month for 36 consecutive months towards her 35-year-old son's student loan. Does that strike you as the action of a financially irresponsible person or that of an overly generous mother?" The report alleges paranoia, citing the installation of a security system. He produced the invoice. This system was installed on the day after her son and daughter-in-law entered her home without notice, bringing with them a man who proceeded to pressure Mrs. Richter into selling her property. This isn't paranoia, Miss Albright. It is a rational, prudent response to a documented home invasion. The report alleges social isolation. He slid over 4 signed and notarized letters. These are from Mrs. Patricia Connolly, Mrs. Maria Flores, Mrs. Sylvia Blackwood, and others, attesting to Mrs. Richter's active participation in their gardening club and weekly social gatherings. Miss Albright's professional neutrality began to waver. She was no longer looking at me as a case file, but as a person. The final blow came when Mr. Finch addressed the pharmacist's original, false statement. He presented Mr. Gable's new affidavit, the one detailing Portia's bribery and manipulation. And then he plugged the small USB drive into his laptop. But perhaps it's best if you hear it in Mrs. Leo Richter's own words. He pressed play. Portia's voice, cold, clear, and utterly damning, filled the silent conference room. The part about her being confused about her meds is the most important for the court to see. The color drained from Miss Albright's face. She stared at the speaker as if it were a venomous snake. The mask of bureaucratic detachment shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. The entire foundation of her case had turned to dust. The woman in front of her was not a senior at risk. She was a senior being targeted. There is a unique power in holding the proof, in knowing that the truth is on your side, written in black and white. It's the moment the gaslighting stops working. If you have ever had to meticulously save the receipts, the texts, the emails, just to protect your own sanity and your own story, I want you to simply type, "I have the receipts" in the comments. It's a badge of honor for every survivor who knew the truth would one day be their shield. After a long moment of stunned silence, Miss Albright slowly closed her folder. Her tone had changed entirely. It was no longer impartial. It was concerned, but now, the concern was directed at me, not about me. "Mrs. Richter," she said, her voice full of a new respect. "Based on the evidence presented here, I will be recommending the immediate closure of this wellness case." She paused, looking at the USB drive, then at me. "Furthermore, this evidence, particularly this recording, now legally obligates my office to open a new file. A file for the potential financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, with your son Leo and your daughter-in-law Portia Richter as the persons of interest." My counterattack had not only succeeded, it had turned their own weapon back against them. The state was no longer investigating me. The state was now investigating them. The meeting with Miss Albright felt like a decisive victory, the turning point in the war. The state was no longer a weapon to be used against me. It was a shield protecting me. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. A cautious optimism began to bloom in the barren landscape of my life. Surely, I thought, this would be the end. Faced with an official investigation into their own criminal behavior, any rational person would retreat, cut their losses, and disappear into a cloud of shame. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of fragile peace, reclaiming the simple rhythms of my life. I planted autumn bulbs with Patricia. I attended the gardening club's potluck. I even finished a watercolor painting of the maple tree in my front yard. I began to imagine a future where the loudest sound in my house was the ticking of the grandfather clock, not the pounding of my own heart. But I had made a critical mistake. I assumed I was dealing with rational people. I had forgotten Mr. Finch's warning. I had forgotten about the desperation of a cornered animal. The next attack didn't come as a whisper or a shout. It arrived on a crisp October afternoon, delivered by a uniformed courier. It was a thick, formal envelope, addressed to me, with a copy sent to the offices of Finch & Associates. It had the austere, intimidating look of something that could change a life. My hands were surprisingly steady as I signed for it. The calm I had cultivated over the past 2 weeks had created a reservoir of strength I didn't know I had. I took the envelope into my study, sat at my desk, and slid it open with Robert's old letter opener. The documents inside were dense with the cold, alien language of the law, but the meaning was brutally, obscenely clear. It was a formal petition, filed in the family court of Providence County. The title of the document screamed at me from the page, "Petition for Appointment of Guardian of the Person and Estate." The petitioner was listed as Leo Richter. The respondent, the person whose life was being put on trial, was me, his mother, Veronica Richter. I read the words, but my mind refused to accept them. He was asking the court for an emergency hearing. He was asking a judge to declare me mentally incompetent. He was asking to be appointed my legal guardian, which would give him absolute, unchecked control over every aspect of my life, my finances, my medical decisions, where I lived, who I saw. He was asking a court of law to legally erase me as a person and turn me into a dependent, a ward of the son who had disowned me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about my very soul. The petition was a masterwork of fiction. It rehashed every lie they had ever told, now sworn to under penalty of perjury. It painted me as a paranoid, senile old woman being manipulated by a cabal of opportunistic neighbors and an overly litigious attorney. It claimed the social worker, Miss Partowers Atwar T. Albright, had been deceived by a carefully orchestrated performance. It was a scorched earth assault on my character, my sanity, and the people who had stood by me. The pain was physical. It was a cold, heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. To see my son's name, the name I gave him, signed at the bottom of a document that was essentially his legal attempt to annihilate my existence, was a betrayal so profound it defied language. It was the ultimate act of maternal crucifixion. He was willing to publicly humiliate me, to have me legally branded as insane, all for a chance at getting his hands on his inheritance a few years early. I immediately called Alistair Finch. He was expecting it. "This is their Hail Mary Veronica," he said, his voice grim. "The state's exploitation investigation has them backed into a corner, and they know it. If they can get a judge to declare you incompetent and appoint Leo as your guardian, it muddies the water. It gives them control of your assets, and they can try to shut down the state's case from the inside. It's a desperate, disgusting tactic, and we're going to fight it with everything we have." He paused. "But I need you to be prepared. The hearing will be brutal. They will put you on the stand and try to tear you to pieces. They will use every word, every action, every memory against you." I looked down at the legal papers in my hand. They felt as heavy as a tombstone. Any lingering, microscopic hope I might have harbored for a future reconciliation, for the return of the son I once knew, vanished completely. The bridge was not just burned. Its ashes had been scattered into a bitter wind. I was no longer fighting for my house. I was no longer fighting for my money. I was fighting for my name, for my mind, and for my right to walk the earth as a free woman. The final battle was about to begin. The 3 weeks leading up to the trial were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Their lawyer inundated Mr. Finch's office with motions and requests, designed to exhaust and intimidate me. They subpoenaed my financial records, my medical history, anything they could get their hands on to twist into a weapon. But with Mr. Finch as my shield and my army of friends as my support, I refused to break. The day of the hearing, I walked into the Providence County Family Courthouse, not with fear, but with a cold, righteous fury. I was no longer a respondent in a case about my sanity. I was a survivor, about to tell my story. The courtroom was an imposing chamber of dark wood and solemn tradition, designed to make an ordinary person feel small. Across the room, I saw them. Leo sat stiffly in his new suit, his eyes fixed on the empty witness stand, unable to look at me. Portia was dressed in a conservative black dress, a calculated performance of a concerned, grieving daughter. She met my gaze for a fleeting second, and in her eyes, I saw no remorse, only cold, hard ambition. Behind me, in the gallery, sat Patricia, Maria, and Sylvia, a silent, formidable wall of support. Their lawyer began, his voice smooth and sonorous. He painted a tragic portrait for the judge, a beloved family matriarch, once the pillar of their lives, now sadly succumbing to the ravages of age, her mind poisoned by paranoia and influenced by opportunistic outsiders. It was a beautiful, compelling work of fiction. Portia was his first witness. Her performance was breathtaking. She wept as she described my supposed confusion, my episodes of forgetfulness. She recounted how I had become hostile and withdrawn, isolating myself from the family that loved her so dearly. "We just want to help her, Your Honor," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We want to make sure she's safe." Then it was Mr. Finch's turn to cross-examine. The temperature in the room dropped. His questions were like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and merciless. "Mrs. Leo Richter," he began, "you've painted a picture of a deeply caring daughter-in-law. Can you provide the court with a single date in the last year when you initiated a call with my client that did not include a request for money?" Portia stammered, "Well, we talked about many things." "A date, Mrs. Richter," Finch pressed. "Just one." "She couldn't," he continued. "You testified that your wedding was a small, intimate affair. Was my client, the woman who had been paying your husband's $800 a month student loan, not considered intimate enough to receive an invitation?" The color drained from her face. It was complicated. "Was it also complicated when you solicited $5,000 from my client for a honeymoon fund, money which you then used to pay for the very wedding you excluded her from?" The question landed like a physical blow. The judge's eyes narrowed. Leo was next, and his testimony was even weaker. He mumbled his memorized lines about my erratic behavior, his gaze never leaving his own hands. When Mr. Finch cross-examined him, the facade crumbled completely. "Mr. Richter, is it your testimony today that your 71-year-old mother, who you claim is mentally incompetent to manage her own affairs, was somehow competent enough to pay your bills, co-sign your loans, and fund your lifestyle for the last 3 years?" The logical trap was inescapable. Leo had no answer. The final act of their pathetic play was a psychiatrist they had hired, who testified that my refusal to be evaluated by him was a classic sign of cognitive decline. But Mr. Finch dismantled his testimony by presenting the thorough, positive evaluation from a court-appointed expert we had already secured. Then, it was our turn. Mr. Finch called his final witness. The plaintiff calls Mr. David Gable to the stand. Mr. Gable, my pharmacist, walked to the stand, his face pale but his expression resolute. He told the court, in his own words, about Portia's visit, her lies, her manipulation, and the $1,000 bribe. He explained how he had signed the false affidavit under pressure and how his conscience had forced him to come clean. Then, Mr. Finch turned to the judge. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to play a piece of audio evidence." The judge nodded. Mr. Finch pressed a button on his laptop, and Portia's voice, her real voice, stripped of all its fake sweetness, filled the silent courtroom. It was the recording from Mr. Gable's phone. The part about her being confused about her meds is the most important for the court to see. The gasp from the gallery was audible. Portia's face contorted in a mask of pure reptilian fury. Their lawyer looked down at his table as if searching for a hole to crawl into. It was the sound of a lie being executed in public. There is nothing louder than the truth spoken in a room full of lies. It has its own frequency, its own power. We've all had moments where we wish the world could just hear the one piece of evidence that would change everything. If this moment of pure, undeniable truth gave you chills, just do me a favor. Take a look at the clock right now and type the exact time, wherever you are in the world, in the comments. Let this be a global timestamp for the moment the truth finally won. The rest of the trial was a formality. Their case hadn't just been damaged, it had been annihilated. After Mr. Finch's closing statement, the judge looked from the audio equipment to the faces of my son and his wife, then finally, to me. His expression was unreadable. The court will take a 2-hour recess before delivering its judgment. I sat with Patricia and my friends, my hands folded in my lap. I had shown them my iron. I had spoken my truth. Now, all I could do was wait for the verdict that would decide if I was to be a person or a property. The 2 hours the judge took to deliberate were the longest of my life. We sat in the sterile, beige courthouse cafeteria, my friends and I, a small island of silent solidarity. Patricia tried to make small talk. Maria offered me a part of her sandwich, which I couldn't possibly eat, but mostly we just sat, the unspoken tension hanging over us like a shroud. In that agonizing limbo, I was forced to confront the question I had been pushing away. What if I lose? What if the judge, for some reason, believes their lies? I imagined a life under their control, my home sold, my finances managed by Portia, my days spent in a facility of their choosing, a prisoner of their greed. And in that moment, I made a silent, ironclad vow to myself. I would not let it happen. I didn't know how, but I would sooner burn everything to the ground than hand them the ashes. When the bailiff called us back into the courtroom, I walked in not as a defendant, but as a woman who had already decided her own fate. I would be free, one way or another. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation. The judge entered, his face an unreadable mask of judicial impartiality. He sat, adjusted his robes, and the room fell into a tomb-like silence. He cleared his throat and began to speak. He didn't start with the verdict. He started with a meticulous, brutal dissection of the case Leo and Portia had presented. He addressed each of their allegations, his voice a calm, methodical instrument of destruction for their lies. Regarding the petitioner's claim of the respondent's cognitive decline, he began, his eyes scanning a document on his desk. This court finds no credible evidence whatsoever. On the contrary, the court-appointed psychiatric evaluation submitted by the respondent's counsel finds Mrs. Richter to be not only fully competent, but in possession of cognitive functions that are well above average for her age group. She is, in the expert's own words, exceptionally sharp and resilient. He moved on. Regarding the claim of paranoia, evidenced by the installation of a security system, he paused, looking over his spectacles directly at Leo. This court finds that Mrs. Richter's decision to install security measures on her property was a prudent and entirely rational response to the documented, unsolicited entry of the petitioner and his wife into her home, in the company of a man whose stated purpose was to have her removed from it. With every sentence, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. He was not just reading a verdict, he was speaking the truth. He was validating my reality. Finally, he turned his attention to their motives, and the calm in his voice was replaced by a cold, hard edge of judicial fury. This court has reviewed all the evidence presented, including financial statements, sworn affidavits, and audio recordings, he said, his gaze now fixed on Portia. And it has come to a clear and unavoidable conclusion. This petition is not born of a son's concern for his mother's welfare. It is a transparent and malicious attempt at predatory financial gain. It is a gross abuse of the legal process and an insult to the very purpose of this court, which is to protect the vulnerable, not to empower the greedy. He let the words hang in the air for a moment, a public condemnation that was more devastating than any financial penalty. Then he delivered the final judgment. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied, with prejudice. The last two words were a thunderclap. It meant they could never, ever file this claim again. But he wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, his voice like cracking ice, this court finds the evidence of witness tampering and attempted bribery, as presented in the audio recording, to be of a very serious nature. I am therefore referring the full transcript of this hearing, along with all submitted evidence, to the State Attorney General's office for review and potential criminal investigation. A collective gasp went through the gallery. They hadn't just lost their case. They had won themselves a criminal investigation. I watched as the color drained from Leo's face. He slumped in his chair, looking like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Portia's mask of composure shattered, replaced by a look of such pure venomous hatred directed at me that it was almost shocking to behold. As the judge slammed his gavel down, adjourning the court, a wave of relief washed over me so powerful that I felt my knees buckle. Patricia and Maria grabbed my arms, holding me up. We had won. I had won. I walked out of that dark, wood-paneled room and into the brilliant afternoon sunlight, a free woman. The victory was absolute, but it was also profoundly sad. I had to take my own son to war to prove that I was a person. The cost of this freedom had been the last, lingering piece of my heart that still belonged to him. The aftermath of the trial was not a loud celebration, but a quiet, profound exhale. The war was over. The silence that filled my house was no longer tense and expectant. It was the peaceful, empty silence of a battlefield after the guns have fallen quiet. I heard snippets of news about Leo and Portia through the neighborhood grapevine. They were drowning in legal fees from their failed lawsuit. The Attorney General's investigation, a slow-moving but relentless machine, was now their problem, not mine. I heard they had to sell the Subaru, that they moved out of their trendy apartment into a smaller place across the city. A distant, clinical part of me felt a flicker of sadness for the son I once knew, but it was like mourning a person who had died long ago. Their new life was a reality of their own making, built from the ashes of their own greed. In the stillness of my new reality, I began to look at my own life, at my own home, with new eyes. This house, the one Robert built with his own 2 hands, had been my sanctuary, and then my fortress. But a fortress, once the war is over, can feel like a prison, its walls holding the ghosts of every battle. Every room held a memory, both beautiful and painful. To truly be free, I realized, I couldn't just win the war, I had to leave the battlefield. So, I made a decision that shocked everyone, especially myself. I decided to sell the house. The $750,000 prize they had fought so viciously for, I decided to let it go, but on my own terms. I sold it not out of necessity, but out of choice, to a wonderful young family whose children's laughter I could already imagine filling the halls. It was an act of liberation. With the proceeds from the sale, combined with Robert's savings, I was now a woman of considerable means, with no dependents and no one to answer to but myself. I didn't buy another house. Instead, I bought a beautiful, sunlit condominium on College Hill, with a balcony that overlooked the city skyline of Providence. It was modern, clean, and held no ghosts. And then, I started to live. The very first thing I did was book a trip for one to Italy. I walked the cliffs of the Amalfi Coast, the place Portia had dangled like a carrot to steal my money. I ate gelato in sun-drenched piazzas and toasted to my own resilience with glasses of Chianti. I was reclaiming the dream she had tried to corrupt. Back home, I enrolled in a painting course at the Rhode Island School of Design, and my new, clean walls began to fill with my own vibrant, colorful canvases. But my true purpose, my sweetest and most final act of revenge, came to me one quiet afternoon as I was reviewing my finances with Mr. Finch, who had become a trusted friend. I thought about Robert's legacy. He was a master carpenter, a man who believed in the dignity of honest work, in building things that last. He had built my home, my security, my life, and I knew what I had to do with the money that bore his name. Together, Mr. Finch and I established a charitable trust. It is called the Robert Richter Memorial Scholarship Fund. It is not for students attending Ivy League universities or getting business degrees. Every year, my foundation provides a full 4-year scholarship to a promising student from a low-income family in Rhode Island to attend a top-tier trade school. We fund the futures of aspiring carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and welders. We invest in the young people who want to build the world, not just inherit it. This was my final answer to their greed. The inheritance they had tried to steal through lies and manipulation was now being transformed, year after year, into opportunity for hard-working kids who had nothing. The money they felt entitled to was now being earned through skill, dedication, and character, the very qualities my son had abandoned. I had taken the ultimate prize they were fighting for, the very foundation of their monstrous plan, and put it forever beyond their reach, using it for a purpose that was the perfect and complete opposite of their own values. It was a revenge, not of destruction, but of creation. I had turned their poison into a wellspring of hope. Last month, I attended the first awards luncheon. As I handed the oversized check to a bright-eyed, grateful young woman who wanted to become a master electrician, I felt a sense of peace that no court victory could ever provide. I hadn't just won my life back. I had finally discovered what to do with it. From my balcony now, I can see the lights of Providence twinkling as the sun sets. It's a peaceful sight. The anger that fueled me for so long is gone, replaced by a quiet, settled strength. I don't think about Leo and Portia much anymore. They are like characters in a book I finished reading a long time ago. Their story continues somewhere, but it is no longer my story. The scar of what I lost, the son I thought I had, will always be a part of me, a thin, silvery line on my soul. But it no longer aches. It is simply a reminder that I survived something that was meant to break me. The war taught me a painful but necessary lesson. Family is not an obligation defined by blood. It is a sanctuary built on mutual respect. Love is not a debt to be paid or a transaction to be managed. It is a gift given freely, or it is not love at all. For years, I thought my value was measured by what I could do for others, by how much of myself I could give away. I was wrong. My value was never in my wallet or my willingness to be a safety net. It was in my own heart, my own mind, my own unshakable spirit. The most important person I ever needed to save was myself. This journey has been about tearing down a broken home and building a life. We all face battles, some loud and public, others fought in the silent corridors of our own hearts. But the question is never whether we will be knocked down. The question is what we will build when we rise again. My story is just one of thousands, a quiet battle fought in a quiet town. But the truth is, these stories are everywhere. If you believe in the power of rewriting your own ending, of finding strength in the truth, and of building a new life from the rubble of the old one, then this is your community. This is your space. Subscribe if these stories speak your truth, and let's continue to find our strength together. Thank you for listening.